I was here last year in the same hall, and we had again discussed reforms. Well, the first thing I tried to do when I came into the ministry was to ask three very basic questions. Are we resilient enough technically? Is the power sector resilient enough technically to absorb and bear any disruptions within the entire sector? The answer was no, absolute no. It wasn't a complete no. We were good enough, but we were not good enough as per the international standards and whatever we required in the power sector. The next question was, are we financially resilient enough to absorb the high costs of fuel and any financial disruptions like devaluation of the rupee that completely broke the backbone of the power sector and got the capacity payments to skyrocket, and higher interest rates that did the same to it, and hence the increase in the price of energy. And the answer was again no. And the third and the most important was is the governance structure in the power sector and the regulatory framework and the regulatory authority. Are these three very important components of governing the power sector? Are they resilient enough, and are they strong enough, and are they capable enough to steer the power sector towards efficiency? And the answer was again no. I think there is a huge space that some of it we have been able to assume in terms of improvement. The rest is going to, well, take some time, and Pakistan is going to be moving towards that. We are in the middle of doing that. So once we did that, we listed down a list of reforms that we thought were very important. Daniel Saab ne just asked a question, when would the reforms actually happen? Reforms, in my humble opinion, is an ongoing process. But as far as the power sector is concerned, we have been through some very important reforms. They need to take effect now, and they would take effect, inshallah, in the very near future. And there are about 28 odd reforms that we have already taken. One of them is the introduction of the competitive energy market, which should be rolled out by January or February this year, within the next few months. The other is the depoliticization of the power sector economy as far as the distribution sector is concerned. These were painful reforms. Us politicians and the political economy used to revolve around that. There was a 580 plus billion rupee political economy and inefficiency around that, which we've been able to improve. Then there was the circular debt management, which we have been able to reduce to a great extent. Then there were the IPP negotiations. I'm sorry, I know some of the investors might say, oh, your policies are not consistent enough, and in the middle of it, you go ahead and start negotiating with the same people who you have signed investment agreements with. But the basis of those agreements was not transparent and competitive enough for them to sustain and pull throughout the life of those agreements. Someday, when the government wakes up, it finds enough space to harvest for the betterment of the people and the sustainability of the sector also. So, with a very heavy heart, we had to sit down and renegotiate some of the terms of the IPPs that existed in Pakistan that, on our asking, had kindly invested into the country. But we did find enough fault lines for us to actually put into order. The other was the early retirement of inefficient plants. The other thing that happened in the past few years, and we are actually proud of that, but now it's become scary because of the great instability factor that's coming in, is our renewable energy share of our entire grid. And we should be actually proud as a nation. The Australians were boasting the other day, that their grid has produced 40% clean energy last year. We've done 55% clean energy last year. Hydel is also clean energy, and we're actually proud of the fact that Pakistan has already been through the solar revolution. Do we know that there are 19,000 megawatts of solar energy installed in the system today, off and on grid? And this is also bringing about a huge amount of the pressure on the people who are on the grid and are just using grid power. So we need to have net metering regulations. Another very painful part of the reform, that we have anchors and news reporters and everybody who has a voice in this country has a net metering solution in their house or in their office or in their industry, and they've done it for a good purpose because the price of power was expensive. But I think those regulations need to be improved to a point where it still makes business sense for the investor and yet is not a burden on the rest of the consumers. So better governance in distribution companies, competitive markets. IGSEP itself, उन्होंने कहा अभी जहाजेब साहब ने कहा that the government needs to pull out of some parts of some of these sectors. I mean, we were the only buyers of power in the past. The introduction of the competitive markets means that no more power being bought by the government ever in the future. So competitive markets and buyers and sellers would be trading energy amongst themselves. So just the fact, I mean, for the first time in our country's history, and these are reforms, Mr. Daria, that have already happened. For the first time in Pakistan's history, there has been a proper planning process through which our future power acquisition would be in place after the proper due diligence of the entire system. It's the first time that our IGSEP has been overlaid by the transmission expansion plan, which would ensure that the transmission constraints are taken into account when you want to buy power and want to even get the competitive players to actually put plants in different parts of the transmission system to be traded and wheeled across. The wheeling charge is not ideal, whatever is going to be determined, but it's a big step, it's a big improvement, and we've extracted the standard cost of capacity payments from the wheeling the part of it. I could also list down, and if you give me another opportunity, I'd like to quickly run through the rest of the reforms. Another very important thing, the ministry never used to go through processes of review of the regulator's decisions. It was just a given, irrespective of whether the regulator had the capacity to do whatever the determinations it was coming out with, irrespective of the fact whether the regulator or other parts of the governance structure were influenced by X, Y, or Z. This sector was burdening the exchequer with a huge amount of money that we could not afford. Absolutely not. And we could not have been able to sustain ourselves. Just can you imagine an inefficient multi-year tariff regime being now implemented for the future privatized distribution companies? This sector would cripple in a year. You would not have any distribution company actually survive, and the Q block actually survive with the kind of subsidies that we have to give out in the form of uniform tariff subsidies. So these are big steps that the ministry has already been able to take, and we hope that we do harvest and are able to have trimmed the inefficiencies to a point where the power sector can grow in the future, inshallah.